I must have been a bad girl because I got fired, and only people who were bad got fired. Hello, and welcome to Somewhere on the Spectrum. Today, I want to tell you a story. It's a bit of a sad story. Once I finish telling you the story, I want to process this through an autistic lens and see what can it teach us. This is an old story. This story comes from when I was 16 years old. It is not the only time this has happened. When I was 16 years old, I was in my first job. I was working in a sports shop. I am not a sports person, but I was pretty good at working in a sports shop. One of my favorite things to do in this job was to dress the windows. Even though it was just sports stuff, I always really liked doing window dressing. I worked in retail for 10 years and window dressing was one of my favorite parts of the job. And so I was thoroughly enjoying every week dressing the windows. It was great fun. It was a good use of the time. Sometimes it was very boring working in the shop. And so that was a good use of my time and it was quite fun to do. And there were 5 people who worked in the shop. I worked on Saturdays. There were 2 at the back of the shop where we had like an outdoor store. So it was kind of 2 shops in one. So there was a different manager up there and her worker. And then there was our manager down here and 2 workers with her. And the other worker I thought was quite a good friend of mine. We got on really well. We had a lot of laughs. We didn't know each other outside of shop. I didn't know any of these people outside of the shop. So this was an entirely different group of people to know. There are 2 elements of this story that I think are relevant to an autistic perspective. So the first thing that happened is the boss from the back of the shop became our boss too. So she was in charge of the whole shop. I had known them, but I hadn't had too much to do with them. And I got on really well with my boss. And being 16, I really hadn't a clue what was going on. I'd never heard of the term office politics. So I was quite lost when my boss left. I was feeling very sad and the whole vibe of the place had changed. I looked forward to going to work. My boss was pretty cool. Having that disappear and be replaced, the new lady, really, it was a completely different vibe. She was older. We didn't have that much in common. She was very cliquey and I just didn't really get on in the same way. Very quickly, going to work became not as much fun. I was now quite stressed going to work. I didn't know what I was going to be walking into. I didn't know how it was going to go. I was worried I was going to make mistakes in terms of like the office politics and relating to people. I didn't know what to say to this new manager really, but I was trying my hardest. I was trying to be friendly. I was trying to be nice, but I was kind of stressed about it. And then one day I came into work and the other girl that I usually would work with was dressing the windows. And there was this really weird vibe about the place. And I was a little bit upset because that was my job, but she was doing it. And then the other lady made some comments. And basically what I understood is that this girl had always wanted to do the window. And now that my boss had left, she was able to do the window. And I had been hogging the window. And this was really hard for me because I got on really well with that girl, or so I thought. And I couldn't understand why didn't she just tell me she wanted to do the window? Like, sure, I enjoyed doing the window, but I would be very happy to share that job. I didn't need to do it every week. That was totally fine. But she never said anything to me. As far as I could remember, she had never asked to do it. She'd never mentioned an interest in doing it. So I thought I was doing a job that nobody else wanted to do. It never crossed my mind that I was hogging something that someone else wanted to do. And the thing is, that was what I was told by my manager. I didn't really talk to her very much after that because there was very much this feeling that she was on the manager's side now. There was this feeling of I was being iced out and isolated and she was on their side. And I didn't understand what was happening. And I was also really sad because this had been a really nice place for me to go on Saturdays. And now it was becoming this super stressful environment. And I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And I was just really freaked out by the whole thing. And then people suck, honestly. People really suck. I'd been working all day and I had gone into the back office to do some tidying. And I had been there for a while and then it was getting to closing time. I remember feeling really stressed out. It was so uncomfortable to be in the shop and I was really stressed out. And I remember that I was staying back there for longer, making up stuff to do because I didn't want to go back onto the shop floor again. And there I was busily working away, and the manager came in and she basically said, I can see you're not happy anymore here. So I think, this has run its course, and I think, you don't need to come back next week. And I was really confused. I was super confused. Like, what are you even saying right now? What does this mean? Because she didn't outright say, you're fired. She wasn't angry with me. She didn't say, you've done this so wrong. There was no like reasoning happening. It was just this like almost platitudes that were happening, and like these suggestions almost that I shouldn't come back next week. I did finally get it to the point that I understood what was happening. I was then trying not to cry because I didn't understand why this had happened. I didn't feel that I could really push back in any way. And mostly I was in shock. Really, that was the key point. I was mostly in shock. So I stayed in the back of the shop until closing time, packed up my stuff, and went out the front door with everybody else. And they pulled the shutter down and everybody said goodbye. Everybody said, I'll see you next week. And I just kind of stood there like nodding my head. Okay, see you next week. Bye. And then went off to catch my bus and basically sat on the bus for 20 minutes, just stunned. Just really stunned, trying not to cry. I desperately didn't want to cry in front of everybody because I think I knew once I started it would be bad, but just really stunned. I was so shook because I didn't know what had happened. I was so confused. And the main point was, what did I do wrong? I was searching through all of my memories thinking, what did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong. What was it? What did I do wrong? And I was really scared when I got home. To be fair, there was absolutely no reason to be scared. My income was not supporting the family in any way. It was basically just pocket money. My parents expected nothing from me with this job. But I was really scared when I got home because I felt like I'd been a bad girl. I must have been a bad girl because I got fired, and only people who were bad got fired. So that must be me. I must have done something wrong. And so I went home. Now I was crying and shaking and worried and stressed because I was going to have to tell my parents that I got fired, and I knew I wouldn't be able to say why I got fired because I had no idea why I got fired. So I went home and my parents asked me what's wrong. And I said, I'm really sorry, but I got fired today. And they were like, what? Pardon? What do you mean? And I said, I'm really sorry, but I got fired today. And we had this like moment of stuckness because their reaction was the same as mine. What? And of course, then the questions came, and the question wasn't, what did you do, actually? The question was, why were you fired? Which is a fundamentally different question. And when they asked me, why were you fired? I couldn't answer. I had no idea. And I said, I don't know why I was fired. I don't know why I was fired. And so my mom just sort of sat me down and said, okay, explain what happened. So I like tearfully made my way through the story. And she said, and that was it? They just left? And I was like, yeah, they just left. And the thing was, the people that I'd been working with, they didn't know that I'd been fired. My mom was like super stunned that this had been done. And then she was angry. Then she was really, really angry because from her perspective, she felt that I had been pushed out. It was badly done. There was no reason for it at all. And I was made to feel like I was the bad guy. And ultimately, my mum very quickly worked out that what had happened is the other lady had taken over and she didn't want anyone in the shop who was allied to the previous boss. And I had very much been allied to the previous boss, not on purpose, just because she was cool and we had worked together. And because I didn't understand office politics then, I had been thrown out because I hadn't been trying to make friends with this new boss because I didn't know that that was necessary. And so I'd been thrown out because I wasn't allied to the new team. And I was 16 and I didn't know any better. And it was cruel and rude and hurtful. And as you can imagine, it stuck with me for a long time. It is not the only time that I've been fired. And I'm sure that those of you who are listening also have experiences of being fired. Some of you maybe have a lot of experiences of being fired. And the difficulty with being autistic is that we blame ourselves for getting fired. The good thing about knowing you're autistic is that you are able to start to identify that you are not at fault for being fired. most of the time, getting fired when you're autistic has nothing to do with your ability in the job. It has nothing to do with anything that we would judge to be of relevance, and everything to do with the social expectations of neurotypical society. So if you got fired, it probably wasn't your fault, because you probably couldn't have done it in any other way. You were set up to fail. So let's take a look at this story from an autistic perspective. So first of all, when I meet people that I connect with, I connect very tightly with them and I enjoy being around them. And the loss of them is always very sad for me because it's rare to come across people that I connect with. In work, very often those people leave suddenly without warning, and that makes it harder. But also for me, I'm probably not going to keep in touch with them. Realistically, it's not very easy for me to keep in touch with people. So when they leave work, I'm probably not going to keep in touch with them easily over time. And that's very sad too, because I've learned over time that that's going to happen. This was the very first time that it was happening. I didn't know what was happening. So that's a little different from that perspective. So the first thing is the honesty from others. Very often we are going into social situations with a level of honesty that neurotypical people are not used to and do not function under. This can be very confusing for us because we are very happily trying to work our way around being honest people because we're told at school, be honest, don't lie. So we take that literally and we're honest. And we don't lie, and people hate us for it. I'm being honest. They're not being honest. I'm going in thinking, assuming that we're all on the same page and we're all being honest and that we all have a level of friendship that allows for honesty. Without understanding, that's not how neurotypical situations work. And unless we know to ask a direct question, often we will get no answer. So with the windows, I assumed that I was the only person who wanted to do the windows because my friend never said anything about wanting to do the windows. I didn't know to ask, does anybody else want to do the windows? Because I was 16 and having fun. She did want to do the windows. And rather than being honest with me and saying, can I do it this time? Or being honest with my boss when I wasn't there even, rather than doing that, she went behind my back and complained to somebody else who then put her in the windows and created this extremely uncomfortable atmosphere by avoiding any kind of honesty or confrontation with me. That's the crux of it. If they had confronted me with this situation, I would have been able to say, go for it. That's fine. I'm totally fine with that. But they didn't. They avoided the confrontation and they just put her to doing the windows, and I didn't know what was going on. And I felt that I couldn't be honest and say, what happened? What just happened? Because I felt like I was being stupid for not knowing what was going on. Honesty from others is not so likely to be reciprocated as our honesty. It's often not the same kind of honesty, and the honesty that we believe is required from the world is actually too much in general, and people hate us for telling the truth. So reel back the honesty. And try and notice when you're hogging something, because very often we love doing things, we get excited about doing things, we forget that other people might also want to have a go at doing those things. So we got to slightly reel back on the things that we really love doing and at least ask around and double check and say, maybe I could have said, look, I love doing the windows, I do them every week, but I just wanted to double check. Is everyone okay with me doing the windows every week, or would somebody else like a go? And that maybe could have helped that situation. The social connotations of what was going on in that situation were completely unfathomable to me. At 16, a lot was going on in my life. And I was really, really stressed out. I didn't understand what was happening at school with the social connotations between my friends, the social relationships, how it was all moving very quickly. And I knew I was doing it wrong and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. But in this office situation, it wasn't. It was a shop. But you know what I mean? Like office politics kind of a situation. I was completely baffled. This was my first time in this kind of environment. Women can be very cliquey, and women were cliquey at school. The girls had cliques at school. But I assumed that as you grew up, you grew out of childish behavior. You grew out of bullying people, of manipulating people, of one-upmanship, all this kind of stuff I thought you'd grow out of it. I thought that was high school behavior. So it never crossed my mind that the grown adult who was our manager would also be behaving in the same way as some of my teenage friends. I didn't understand what had happened, that the circumstances had now changed, that I now needed to demonstrate an allegiance to a new boss, that I needed to change the way that I was behaving in the store in accordance with the expectations of the new boss, that the new boss was different in terms of how she wanted to have us communicating together. I didn't understand any of that, and so therefore didn't do any of those things and was just generally going in quite befuddled because things had changed and I was a bit overwhelmed. And finally, rejection sensitivity. Massive. Not fun. Very, very painful. In this case, it came from multiple points. My boss had left. I felt like that was a rejection. It wasn't her fault, but she wasn't there anymore. So I felt like that was a rejection. Then really not much later, my good friend that at least she's still there kind of feeling is now not talking to me anymore, kind of avoiding me. And I didn't know why. There was no explanation about it. So that very much was a feeling of rejection from her that had no explanation and a lot of pain because I really liked her. And then finally, the rejection sensitivity of being fired. We have a cultural connotation around being fired, this belief that there must have been something you did to get fired. I think it's really important right now that we throw that out, because right now there is a lot of firing happening. Most of it is happening for bad economical decisions made by people in positions of power and wealth and have nothing to do with the individuals who are on the receiving end of that. And those individuals are the ones who have to live with the fallout from all of that and the mental stress from it all. So I think it's really, really important that we throw out this idea that you got fired because you did something wrong. Every time I've been fired, it had nothing to do with what I did in any sort of related to your job kind of way, and everything to do with the social expectations that as an autistic person, I couldn't follow. And even if they had known that I was autistic, I still would have been fired. Both times that I was fired, I still would have been fired because despite them knowing I was autistic, I wouldn't have fit into the social expectations. They might have been more wary of firing me because I had a protected characteristic, but the logic would have been the same because people generally don't understand why they don't like us, right? A lot of times people don't like us. It's a feeling that they have. They don't know exactly why. The feeling they're picking up is because we're not hitting the right social things in the right way. They can feel that, they can sense it, but they don't know what it is because they're not studying their social connections. They're not studying how they fit in. They're not studying how they build social relationships. We are. We're the ones that are the experts on that. They are not paying attention. They're just doing it and they're not thinking about it. We suffer from that situation. So the rejection sensitivity of being fired is huge because it comes with a cultural ramification of you did something wrong. In addition, you are being thrown out of that clique, of that social environment. And the worst thing you can do to a human is isolate them, is throw them out, is saying, you are not welcome here. We don't like you. And for us autistic people and ADHD people, we get that more than anybody else. And that feeling hurts all humans. We feel it more often. And so therefore it becomes rejection sensitivity. It becomes this super sensitivity to anything remotely near to rejection. It hurts a lot. It takes a long time to recover from, and it certainly can be traumatic. We are more likely to get CPTSD from exactly this kind of situation. And the fear of going back into the workplace after you've been fired, I would say there is a limit to how many times we can do it. I would say that it is a major cause of burnout for a lot of people, this being thrown out from social situations, not being accepted, and the rejection sensitivity related to that. I would say that is a big thing for a lot of us that causes a huge amount of CPTSD that makes it hard for us to go back into work again. And that is a story for another day. If you found this episode useful, that's good. Please like, subscribe, drop a comment. Let me know your own experiences. Getting fired sucks so much. I would be honored if you would share with us how many times you've been fired. I recognize that's not a very easy thing to ask you to do. So instead, if you would share a story or let us know what you think the cause was, is it related to the social connections? Was it something else? It would be great if you'd let us know, because I think this is a really painful subject for many of us. And I think it's really helpful to know that we're not alone. I'm lucky in that this has only happened to me twice, but I tend to only stay at jobs for 18 months. So I have moved myself on multiple times because I felt this coming and I was afraid of it. That's how I've escaped being fired more times. Let us know in the comments. I would be very grateful and honored to hear your stories. Hope to see you next time. Bye.